the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started, and other folks I'm sure will continue to join. But welcome everyone well, happy November. Hope it was a lovely Halloween for those who celebrated. And we're kicking off our week this week after just a jam-packed week last week. If you missed any of the events, remember to check out the Ostrom Workshops YouTube channel, because last Wednesday alone, we had a wonderful Ostrom Book Club discussion with Eric Nordman, a really nice as well, special convening on water governance with our very own Bill Blumquist and Ed McKinnon, and just really nice discussion. So please do check them out if you missed them. Today, we're continuing with the colloque with our very own Michael Mattioli from right here at IU at the Mowers School, and his project, FDA's Privacy Halo, which I know you started, I think, before the pandemic, it's fair to say, Mike, but I just as I was reading through it, I just couldn't help but see so much relevance and connections with the debates that we're having now, unfortunately, in some cases, around FDA certifications and just general trust in the public health infrastructure. So I think it's very timely, and I look forward to the discussion. And per usual, after Mike's 20-ish whatever minutes of opening remarks here, we'll have a nice long duration for questions. Use the raise hand feature. Feel free to use the chat. And if you're willing, Mike, to stay on a little bit after 1 o'clock, in case there is a chance to continue the discussion, if folks still have questions, we'll go to that right after. So without further ado then, Mike, the digital floor is yours. And thanks so much again for being here.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you for having me. Thank you everyone for having me. It's really a pleasure to present this project, and I need feedback on it. As Scott mentioned, I worked on this project, developing the idea, putting together the survey before the pandemic, and I hit the brakes for a number of reasons, really. One was the pandemic, just as Scott mentioned, prompted all of these new and timely conversations about public trust in the FDA. And what I'm looking at in this paper isn't tied directly to vaccine policy, but I realized as I was trying to carry out this survey that there were pretty strong and divergent perceptions of the safety of vaccines. And, I assumed that a lot of people were thinking about the FDA in a new way. So the pandemic led me to think, I'm going to hit pause and just think about whether I should carry out this survey after these debates have settled down a little bit. I want to get a clear understanding of what people think the words FDA approved mean, and maybe pandemic issues were clouding that. So that was just one of several reasons why I hit the brakes, and now I'm taking my foot off the brake and getting back to it. So this project is in partial completion. I haven't carried out the survey yet, but I'd like to just start by describing to you the idea, how I came to this idea, and what I'm hoping to learn from this project. So I'll share some slides here. I'll try to. If I share my screen, can you all see these?
It's perfect, Mike.
Great.
And unfortunately, the dictation is still up there as well. So apologies for that, guys. We'll continue to work.
I'm not looking at it, so hopefully it's able to understand what I'm saying.
It always seems to happen when he's sharing a screen, so. Yeah,
I'm not sure either. But it is actually remarkably effective as you're talking about AI. So perhaps maybe it's purposeful, Mike.
It's the world we're living in now.
Yeah. Don't worry. We'll deal.
So this project came about actually through work that I was doing in the realm of knowledge commons. So in 2018 workshop, friends, Brett Frischman and Madeline Sanfilippo and Kathy Strandberg asked if I would be willing to contribute a chapter to the Knowledge Commons book on privacy. And I started looking at mental health apps. I thought it was an interesting, area to study at the time. So, this is just an example of an article from that time period from The Verge. Mental health app might be sharing your data without telling you. Another example of an article from the New York Times. California testing a digital fire alarm for mental distress. So I thought there were a few things that I liked about this area of technology. One was that this field, this growing field, was trying to address a major public health problem. And these apps were interesting to me from a tech standpoint because a lot of them purported to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to help people. And the heart of it is gathering a lot of data and using it to try to make predictions and courses of treatment for people. So it prompted privacy issues, clearly. Those were covered in the press from the earliest days. Because I don't have a background in medicine, I felt that it was important for me to approach the project kind of like, a case study, the way a journalist might, just by talking to people. So I talked to the CEOs of several startups in this space. I talked to academic researchers, also talked to academics who were being quoted in newspaper articles about this a lot, really just interviewed based to try to put together case studies on this. One of the outputs was a book chapter for the Privacy as Knowledge Commons book. And there I talked with companies involved with creating mental health chatbots. They didn't like the term chatbot. They all said, we have to call it a assistive, they had some term for it, but I like chatbot. And the way that these technologies work, this is an example of one of them, Wobot. So Wobot is a chatbot, an assistive agent, and it guides patients through a course in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically this course of treatment that's very commonly administered for people who have depression or anxiety related mental health problems. And it uses all of this data that it collects from its exchanges with users. So that kind of data includes written data that people are typing into the chat interface. It also includes non-written data. Sometimes the Wobot will present you with a list of choices. Today I'm feeling A, B, C, or D. So sort of like multiple choice data. It uses that data to help people, but also, like so many of these tools, to train and refine its algorithm over time. And that seemed to present clear privacy issues. So CBT, I could talk about it if there's time later on, but the heart of it is trying to understand the cognitive structures in our minds that are sometimes faulty. Perception of reality is not always right. So in the mind of somebody experiencing anxiety, let's say, something as routine as a blood pressure reading might signal either death or perfect health. So CBT is about trying to retrain those who experience these patterns of thinking to identify them and to try to correct them. So importantly, in the course of doing this research, I learned that the FDA had started to grant clearances to cognitive behavioral therapy app makers and for these companies to market these products as medical interventions. And that interested me a lot. I was generally following what the FDA was doing. I was also, following these companies, looking at FDA press releases for mental health apps that were getting marketed. Mostly they were geared around anxiety, depression, ADHD, substance abuse. So really a lot of the problems that are at the heart of the mental health crisis in the country. I could give you a look at some of these here, and then I'll show you what the survey in progress looks like. This is an app, it's made by a company called Pear Therapeutics, called Reset, and it is a prescription therapeutic designed to help people who have substance abuse problems. And you can see that in the materials here, they highlight their FDA authorization. So we're the first prescription digital therapeutic to receive authorization from the FDA. Most companies that have received FDA authorization are using that in their marketing materials, saying FDA authorized, FDA approved, some version of that language. Here's just a picture of what the app looks like. And this is just language from the website, safety information. So I'll move on and show you another example quickly before getting to the survey a little bit. This is an app, a video game that has received FDA authorization or clearance for treating ADHD in children 8 to 11 years old. And I'll just show you some more examples of slides here. Endeavor RX, the first and only, there it is. I have to move my screen around to see it. The first and only FDA cleared treatment delivered through video game experience. So the point is, these apps are signaling to consumers that there's FDA clearance. I should say, I'm an intellectual property scholar, and this is kind of a trademark thing. People looking at a government agency giving its stamp of approval to a product might create some goodwill in the mind, or might pull on some goodwill in the minds of consumers. So that's where I was coming from. I was writing about these apps for other reasons, and the trademark angle or the marketing angle seemed really interesting to me. So I started wondering whether consumers seeing that mark or stamp of approval on an app might just be less attentive to some of the problems these apps raise. I had cited some scholarship in the last couple of years in my draft where academics have shown that these apps create privacy concerns. They collect all sorts of user data. They're not subject to the same framework that a human therapist is subject to. And in other words, the same legal framework that requires confidentiality, state licensing requirements, things like that. So my question became whether consumers might just trust these apps more because they're FDA approved, not realizing what the words FDA approved or FDA cleared mean. So that kind of became a hunch. And then it became a stronger hunch as I talked to people in the course of doing related research. Consumers who I talked to, users of these apps, said things like, well, it's FDA approved, so it's legit, right? Like it's not going to steal my data. And that's where this project really came from. I'll show you, I just have a few slides here of some of the marketing materials that these apps have used. It's an aside, but it's actually an aside that I turned into a symposium piece. The FDA in April 2020 granted a temporary permission for these apps to market themselves as medical interventions without FDA approval. This is another reason why I kind of slowed down on carrying out this survey. It was a temporary approval that these companies responded to. So many of these apps previously were marketed as wellness devices or wellness interventions. And they used the language of wellness, like feel your best with this app. And as soon as the FDA granted this temporary approval or permission to market these things as medical interventions without FDA approval, the app makers immediately responded by changing the language on their websites. So I'm going to just show you, I have to move, I have Zoom in the way here. So let's see, I have some examples of the before and after here. This was the title of the FDA's enforcement policy during COVID-19. And the FDA did this, as you might guess, because there were widely reported increases in anxiety and depression, in the general public during the early days of COVID, especially. So here's Wobot before the temporary permission. Wobot has something to offer everyone. We want you to feel your best. And afterward, they started using language like, we have the empathy and expertise of a therapist. This is a mental health solution. The language of treatment, the language of a medical intervention, citing specific problems like generalized anxiety. Another app called Uper, at first, early on, said, feel your best with Uper. Afterwards, it said, feel your best, but this is also a mental health checkup. AI therapy is modern mental health care, really more of like a medical claim. So anyway, getting back to my project, I worked with our amazing Center for Survey Research here on campus and was lucky enough to get a modest grant to develop a survey. And a survey expert at the center, Lillian Yang, worked with me to put together a survey that we imagined deploying on Facebook or Twitter, using ads like this to try to get some survey responses. Think you know your wellness app. Another image here. Think you know your wellness app. And we started putting together a survey that we would give through Qualtrics, asking questions like this. Have you ever used a wellness, stress relief, mental health, or other digital therapeutic app? The main goal of our survey was to get a sense of what people think the words FDA cleared means in this context. Does it mean that this is safe, or does it provide some other assurance, like this isn't going to mess with your data or share it with third parties? How much do people trust the FDA really? We created a mock-up of a fake app called Fear Not to treat anxiety. And it uses language like FDA cleared, relies on CBT, et cetera. And then we asked a bunch of questions like, first of all, did you read the ad? You know, what's it for? To relieve anxiety. How much would you trust the app? How concerned or not are you about keeping your information secure online? And all of this led up to questions about whether people just aren't as attentive to privacy concerns with FDA approved mental health apps. We haven't run this survey yet. I would love to know, first of all, you know, if people think that this is an interesting question to ask, general feedback on the idea itself, or ways that, you know, maybe I should modify the research question. Thoughts that you might have on what the current state of, you know, public's perception of FDA, what COVID and the public debates about safety might mean for this project. Hopefully you understand my hesitancy to run the survey during this time when the public's debating the safety of something so important. And let's see, I'm just showing you examples here of the survey. Thoughts on the survey, thoughts on questions that we might be able to ask to try to get at this question. I also feel like I'm walking a fine line. I don't want to outright ask people, do you think the words FDA cleared mean your data is private? Because it sort of gives away the, you know, it gives away the goal of the study. And it also is sort of like too specific. My hypothesis is that people might not think this so specifically. They might just be less attentive when they see the words FDA cleared. Like the person who I chatted with anecdotally said, yeah, it's legit. It's FDA cleared, right? I can trust this. And hopefully you saw in the draft, in reality, these apps really do raise a lot of privacy concerns. So I think that's all I have. That's all I have. I'll end there. I hope this wasn't too casual. I hope it was a good description of the project. And since we're at the 20-minute mark here, I'll close down this window and see if there are any questions or suggestions.
Thank you so much, Mike. Well, first off, round of applause. Well done. Really interesting project. I look forward to discussing it. Understand the hesitancy completely. We have a number of hands going up, so I have a couple of thoughts, questions, but let's turn to them first. And we love it when our fellows, when our awardees, students generally ask the first question. So Laura, if you're willing to kick us off, that would be great. We'll turn to you first, and then we'll turn to Jess and Angie after that.
Sure. So I want to preface and just say I'm very biased because my research area is privacy concerns with fitness trackers and like wellness apps. So I personally think this is great to ask people about if they feel like getting a stamp of approval from some government agency makes their privacy concerns like go away, or how they feel about that if it's private. So there's the answer to that question. I'm interested generally in like how people feel about their privacy with apps and like things like that as a baseline. So I was kind of wondering if you have any questions in your survey just about like, how do you feel about privacy of your data, like when using a service like this as a whole, like maybe not necessarily like a mental health app? Because in my research, we're doing privacy of data collection for like COVID related things right now, and asking people, do you feel comfortable sharing your data with these entities? Like how comfortable do you feel, that sort of thing. people have different perceptions of like how private their things are, or like willingness to share them based on like who they're sharing it with, stuff like that, and just overall. So that depending on who you're asking, that might shift like how they feel about privacy. We've also noticed that people that have more like security or privacy knowledge feel safer doing things even when they're like not necessarily safe. So that there's also that, if that's helpful.
Oh, that's really interesting. So people who are more aware of privacy issues sometimes feel safer.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, well, I know how this works, or I understand like the privacy policy or something. So like I'll share with things. It's kind of a mixed bag. They either feel like I don't want to share anything, I'm going off the grid, or like I want to share all the things. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And by the way, like some additional things to tell you, like some of these apps, many of them are being managed in one way or another by people who are licensed medical practitioners, maybe a psychiatrist or a psychologist. Like they've come out of academic research labs very often at universities. So when I've talked to these companies about privacy issues, some of them have said, well, our company is not subject to the same framework that a therapist is subject to, and we're not a health provider, but I would threaten my own personal license if I created a product that violated state licensing laws by misusing data. So people have sort of pointed to themselves as like professionals as a reason why they wouldn't make a company that, or make a product that would violate people's privacy expectations. That seemed really shaky to me when I heard it. And it felt very shaky. So anyway, that's just one more thing to add.
Excellent. Thanks a lot,
Laura.
Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Jess, we'll turn to you next. And then we have Angie and Joe in the queue.
Sure. So Mike, this is obviously really interesting and obviously also very timely. So good on you for sort of getting on this issue. A couple of questions I have relate to the nature of the population you want to understand. So, excuse me. One could imagine some interesting biases about the population that clicks on your ad. Right? These are people that might be naturally skeptical, right? Or who, think about wellness differently than therapy. It's not clear, right? Like, depending on how you word that ad. So that's just one question in terms of who you think you will get and whether you want to be able to generalize more broadly. And then sort of related, but a little bit different, is whether you want to know anything about government trust more generally, right? Because right now the FDA specifically is extremely polarized, particularly by way of being a government agency. And so I'd be curious, I actually could imagine that there's a subset of the population, and I'm not sure if it's the same subset that would actually use one of these apps in the first place, but for whom FDA approved might not only not mean anything, but might mean something nefarious. And so I'm curious about, A, are you thinking of controlling for general levels of government trust? To get a sense of, is it this agency specifically, right? That people are confused about what it means to be FDA approved? Is it a general distrust of the government, or general trust of the government, as it were, although that's super high right now. So I guess I'm sort of thinking about some other control things you might think about including to really be able to tease out what is general about this and what is specific, right? And what is specific to the particular population you are likely to capture in the way that you are setting up these ads.
That really is helpful to me. The only question that we put into the draft so far along these lines was, would you identify as a liberal, a conservative, stuff like that? But we didn't dive into that much when we put this survey together, and I think we should. I'm not sure how to frame these questions to try to control for it, but yeah, what I've been sort of dismayed by a little bit, maybe I shouldn't be discouraged, is just the fact that there is such a huge public debate, I guess, about whether the FDA can be trusted. It definitely made answering this question much more difficult because, like you said, it's so polarizing. So I came at this paper really as like an IP person thinking about trademark. And it attaches to another project I'm working on, which gets at the thing you're talking about, like government trust more generally. So maybe I should put questions in that, what should I ask? Do you trust
Well, so this makes me think of one paper that you might consider looking to help inform how you want to go about this. And I'll have to look up the exact title. It was featured on Another Politics podcast a while back, but it's essentially about how when people answer questions on a survey, they may know the answer, but especially if it's a factual question, but they will answer according to their identity instead of according to their true understanding of the question. And so, and so their partisan affiliation, and so it's not that people don't understand facts or science, it's that they have particular loyalties that are more important to them. And that can shape how they answer these kinds of survey questions. I will find this paper for you and send it to you, and I hope it might be helpful in thinking about how you structure these kinds of things. Specifically, the importance of including like an "I don't know" answer can really help you get at what your survey respondents are actually saying and what they're sort of saying that corresponds more to their identity than their actual understanding of the question.
That is really helpful. Thank you. And I also see Scott in the chat, the Pew Research you shared. Thank you.
No problem.
A related question I have is whether Facebook is the right place to deploy this. Partly our grant dealt with using some kind of, I forget what the conditions of the grant were, but it dealt with innovative approaches to survey research. So like, using innovative tools. But is Facebook the right place to do this, or should we not use it?
It's a big meta question there, Mike.
I was going to say meta.
It'd be interesting, honestly, to run this survey on the different platforms just to get tease out the results that you would get on LinkedIn versus Twitter versus Facebook, just to highlight, frankly, the biases in the different platforms and populations. But that's a whole separate project. And Joyce, I see chiming in there with perhaps no. And I think, Angie, I saw you shaking your head as well. So, and since you were next, Angie, maybe we can just turn to you, if that's okay.
So I really liked this paper. And I think you're digging in on some really good stuff. I have a couple of, I think, somewhat important comments. The first thing is these are therapeutic apps. And that means that they may be being used by a therapist or being recommended under that certain relationship. And so I think, question number one needs to be who recommended you to this app. And then question number two is, did you even have a clue that the FDA approved this or not? Right? If I had recommended to one of my clients to use something, they're not going to make a decision, right? They're just going to use it. So, you're going to have to tease that out some of where the trust actually is arising from. Because I think if I recommended this to a client, they're going to use it. So, that's step number one of being sure that you're only talking to individuals that have sort of stumbled upon this. And I don't know how that would even happen. So, that has to be question number, one or two to me. Then the other thing you have to figure in is culture and age. And, all of the sort of traditional conversations that we're having now as it relates to all the COVID issues, quite frankly, but all of them, very much come down to culture and age and, all of that stuff. And then the other thing I was going to say is to double check there isn't already some research out there that gives you some background. So DopeSick is a pretty famous at this point. Series of FDA, we could argue mislabeling of the opioid of Oxycontin, and the marketing people knew exactly what they were doing. It's pretty clear. They exploited it, but they relied upon medical doctors as sort of their backup, which sounds to me like what the situation you're in right now. Hey, look, it's just our marketing. The doctors are the ones making the decision. And if these are therapeutic apps, which tells me there's some type of connection with a medical individual, you're in the exact same area, right? It was the FDA that created this special category for Oxycontin that caused massive issues, never reviewed it, never, took a look at it, never officially actually sanctioned it. But nonetheless, we have this, the opioid crisis, if we can even call it just a crisis. I'm not sure it's just literally the killing of a whole lot of Americans slowly, quite frankly. So, I would suggest you look into that research as well, because my guess is the FDA may be behaving slightly differently now at this point in time as well, now that DopeSick is just ridiculously well publicized. Series of books. There's a movie out now. For those of you who are bored and want to watch something, it's gut-wrenchingly awful to watch the series. But if you're not into watching, what's the impact of the opioid crisis, read the book. It's even more disturbing. So I'd recommend they knew exactly what they were doing. They targeted poorer populations that were more likely to be injured without appropriate insurance necessarily, and who likely needed to work every day. So they were just looking for, a drug that would get them through. They knew exactly what they were doing. And I wonder if this isn't somewhat similar, right? We're not really interested in this privacy stuff. We've got these seals of approval and off we go, and we're going to blame it on the therapists for making the recommendation. It sounds shockingly similar. And my guess is the FDA is now going to get some real pushback on that. Those are just my comments off the top of the head. I looked through your paper. I didn't see the actual survey questions. So if you want to run some of those by the group of us, I'm sure I'm happy to jump in on that as well. I can't imagine my life where I would recommend an app to one of my clients. So, but that's just me. There are a lot of people who do.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead. I was going to say I was going to say 2 cents, but I think it was probably $2.
Yeah, Angie, thank you so much. Just immediately, I'm thinking that your comments made me realize I have to distinguish something that I didn't. Some of these apps are marketed directly to consumers and involve no medical professional at all. Some are marketed to mental health providers as prescription-only interventions.
Right.
So
yeah. So I think you really need to flesh that out in the questions too, right? How'd you come here? Because that's a different reliance on trust, a different place that you're localizing the trust.
Yeah, the ones I focused on were not prescription ones. They're marketed directly to consumers. But yeah, thanks for making me think about that, because I think I need to address it. And DopeSick, it's incredibly important and disturbing.
Awful.
Yeah. I'm thinking also, I have a lot of thoughts about what to include here. I mean, one interesting thing is that these apps, the argument in favor of them is that we have this real shortage of mental health professionals. And there are a lot of people who are going undiagnosed and suffering. So the companies making these apps are pointing that out. I should say, I'm naturally, maybe as an academic, suspicious of corporations. Maybe I shouldn't be. Maybe I should try to be more neutral, but I'm aware of all of the privacy violations that large corporations have committed in recent years. So my starting place was, these apps are probably taking the most sensitive data that we have about our mental state and monetizing them. This is bad. And I think that that's true in many cases. At the same time, the other true thing is that people seem to feel better using some of these apps. On the other hand, there are experts who say, actually, these apps really haven't proved in a scientifically rigorous way that they work as well as sitting with a mental health professional. So there are arguments on either side, but it's a really interesting space. So anyway, I'm sorry for.
Oh, no, this is great. As you can tell, Mike, your work is generating a lot of great discussion. So we might stay after 1 o'clock if that's okay. But Joe, over to you next, and then Jamie and Dan.
Hey, Mike, I very much enjoyed your paper. I love the title. A few thoughts here. First one, absolutely speaking from a place of ignorance. I've never done any empirical research, and I do know that oftentimes that you don't want to ask the specific question you're trying to get the answer to. I'm curious if there are times in empirical research where that's exactly what you should do, and I'm wondering if this is one of those times. I think trying to draw inferences in this area, I'm questionable of that. Like, are you going to be able to make a justifiable inference that what people are really talking about is privacy? So I don't know the answer to that. That's my initial reaction. And I encourage you just to think that through. A couple other really brief thoughts. Do you need to define patients? Because you're talking about two instances from what I understand. One where there's a prescribing physician that says, use this app. And then you're also talking about no physician involvement and consumers are getting it from online. Do you need to define patients? And maybe somebody's not a patient if they're not getting it from a doctor. And then my other thing, and I know this is, maybe this is your next paper here, is I'm really curious about a survey about prescribing physicians that prescribe these apps and what's their understanding of the privacy implications for doing that. I think it's great. I have some other comments that I will send you, and thank you for sharing this with us.
Joe, thank you so much. This is so helpful. I hadn't thought of this question. What do physicians think? And that's really interesting and important. So that seems like the other survey I should do, because in that situation, the physicians really are they're not the end user, but they're the ones who are making a decision to recommend a product. So they're kind of the consumer. They're the ones seeing, that ad is out there. So, all right, you've given me another survey that I should run. So thanks. And I'll also think more about what you said, whether just asking the question is the way to do it, because I'm asking around the question, like, would you buy a product more readily, doing less research if you see the words FDA cleared? Like, and I guess I already said it, but my hunch is that people see these words and just generally feel some sense of trust. That's not specific trust. It's just, this app is legit, it's FDA approved, and maybe that's as far as it goes. But anyway, Joe, thanks.
Mm-hmm. And we'll save the chat as well, Mike, but Angie just had a good thought there about APA, maybe doing some relevant research along those lines already. So one joy of the workshop is there's so many linkages from so many disciplines that you can bring to bear here. But of course, that's up to you, because it's going to be a kitchen sink. Jamie, up to you next, and then over to Dan.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for being willing to share a paper that's in the development phase, because I think these are the fun kinds of papers to talk about, because it just leaves so much room for conversation and it can go in so many different directions. But I think you're asking two really interesting questions, and I wonder if I'm not a survey person, but I'm just wondering if these questions need to even be separated. The idea of trust in the FDA, which seems to be one critical question, and the question of trust in personal information security in our technology. Those two seem like two very separate questions, and you're linking them together in an interesting way in the survey. So I wonder if there's a way to tease those both out and then find out how they change when you overlap them.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think it seems like that could be valuable. Like, are you saying, should we get a sense of whether this is a person who is even aware of privacy issues around apps in general? And that's one avenue.
Yeah, like this is information that I feel like I'm aware of on a more fine-tuned level from being around the workshop and learning about digital privacy from all of you who are concerned about it. And I think people out there are aware that there are privacy issues with technology, but they may not be as fine-tuned even about the extent of that. But I also think the question of FDA approval, you're making an assumption that a lot of people might read that phrase and come to it with trust. I don't think that's necessarily true, because I remember reading a story about a year ago about a doctor who was on one of those FDA approval boards. And he said that he and most of the physicians on that board recommended that the FDA not approve a drug, but the FDA approved it anyways. And so he and all of these physicians totally left that project. They resigned. And I was trying to find that particular article. I couldn't find it, but here's another article about how the FDA, against the advice of the American Lung Association, approved e-cigarettes. So I really think you have two deeply interesting research questions. And the trust in the FDA, you need to examine that assumption even and say, do people carry this unquestionable assumption or are they skeptical?
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful and also really interesting. Thanks for the article. Yeah, my hunch again, it came from this place of like teaching trademark law, where I just thought, okay, that course, when I teach it, we're focused on companies. This is the realm of companies and consumers. And then I realized, well, the government communicates to consumers all the time using similar mechanisms like language, that might inspire some trust or good feelings. But yeah, I could see a lot of people seeing those words and feeling the opposite. So that's something I have to unpackage. And that's all wound up with the COVID era specific stuff specific to this time period too, that I feel like it muddled what I wanted to get at. So yeah, Jamie, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jamie. And over to you next, Dan, sir, and then Enza.
Yeah, so I have a similar thought to Jamie's, actually. I think it would be good to break this survey into two parts. And the first part is just general questions relating to trust of FDA before you get into the specific issues of these kinds of approvals, which are very different from approvals of actual medications, right? And so, and then that same distinction, it seems to me, well, for the patients, my suspicion is, at least for the patients who get these apps prescribed by doctors, their trust in the FDA is kind of irrelevant because it's more about trust in their doctors, right? So I would want to know about the doctor's level of trust in the FDA
Yeah.
for those patients.
This second survey,
Yeah.
looking at what doctors think.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that's really
and the even the first survey, though, I think the people, my suspicion is that people are likely to announce a higher level of distrust in the FDA than they actually have. I think if a patient went to the doctor's office, say, here are two medicines I can offer you. One is FDA approved and the other is not. It's your choice. Now, the doctor can't actually do that, right? But, as a thought experiment. Yeah, I think people are people have grown up with the agency, maybe don't have as high a level of trust in it, but the people who, before the agency existed, it was the Wild West for medications, all kinds of crap that killed people all the time. I mean, opioid is a defect in the system. It's a bug. It's what the system was designed to root out. Although, to be fair, the system seems to fly on a pendulum between not relieving pain and relieving pain too much. Right? We sort of go back and forth on it, but that's an aside. I just think that the people's self-reporting is one thing. I wonder if there are other ways of getting at people's demonstrated level of trust in FDA approvals, right? And here you can think about supplements as opposed to medications and these kinds of things. Right?
That's what I was thinking about while you were talking, the world of supplements.
Mm-hmm.
And this is it's such an interesting idea to me that I had never thought of, that people might use this survey as an opportunity to voice their discontent more than they would really demonstrably distrust the FDA, or practically, choose the non-FDA approved product over the FDA approved one. So I never thought of that. I don't know. Now I'm thinking, how do you collect the, person's demonstrated trust? And I don't know, hypotheticals maybe, or yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Dan, thanks.
Great point, Dan. Oh, I think you're muted, Dan. Sorry. There you go.
Oh, I think you're still
Oh.
muted, Dan.
Oh, no, we still can't hear you, Dan. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Now? Okay.
Oh, there he is.
I want to separate out the general trust questions in the FDA from the specific instantiation of these apps. The apps are a very different thing for FDA to be approving, and you can imagine there'd be significant difference. In fact, you could argue that there should be a significant difference in trust levels
Mm.
with respect to something this novel for FDA to be approving.
Yeah. Yeah. And one interesting thing is that the FDA does require some basic cybersecurity like steps of app makers. So if you want to get clearance, you don't have to like demonstrate that you treat people's medical data with privacy, but you do have to show that like you're using encryption and real basic cybersecurity level.
Are there rules against selling information?
Not that I've seen, no. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put a link up to our piece on securing the internet of healthcare, Mike, from a few years ago. But this is great, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And then Inza, yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I mean, when I listened to the conversation, I just had a very practical thought. Maybe if you later need to link up your the group of people you interviewed with the more, I mean, what's the reference to the general public? I thought you could maybe, but maybe you have thought about it already, include this general trust question by Putnam, which is available for many countries and for many regions. So that just that you have at the end an idea how your particular sample fits to the, I mean, depending on what you want to say, the US American in general, or what your conclusion should be, so that you can link it up to the sample you have.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thanks. That's something
It's Robert Putnam, and it's very simple to add. They have a standardized way of saying, are you in general think people can be trusted? And then there are few variations to that kind of question. So you may just want to pick one that fits to your overall idea.
Okay. I'll definitely add something like that. Thanks. I was missing that.
Excellent.
So, I don't see any more hands up. I was just going to say the survey itself is just the set of Qualtrics questions right now. Does anyone have thoughts on where we should run this? Because I'm feeling less and less like Facebook is the place. The argument in favor of Facebook is that this is where people are likely to encounter ads for these apps. But it's just one place. People might see the ads in a banner ad on a website. They could see them on Twitter. So it's not the only place these apps are being advertised. I've been pushing against Facebook in my mind because it just seems like fewer and fewer people are using that service. So yeah, it might create a biased sample. Or a sample that skews heavy in terms of I don't know, certain age groups, or I'm not sure.
That's what I was wondering, Mike. Have you seen from the results so far what the age groups are of those folks who primarily are using these apps? Because if it's an older, population, maybe Facebook. If it's a bit younger, Instagram, or my God, TikTok. I don't know.
TikTok survey. Well, I don't want to learn.
I want to see you doing a dancing meme to really help sell this. Why you should click on the.
Is TikTok FDA approved yet?
Oh my God.
But yeah, the users of these apps skew young, and there are all kinds of interesting, things that the people who make these apps have told me about that alone. Like they've done aggregate studies on the users and found all sorts of things that were really interesting and sometimes, upsetting. Like the CEO of one service told me that she found teenagers were using her app often when they reported being with friends and feeling lonely or feeling excluded, and opening up the app, to sort of find a friendly voice of some kind to express their feelings to. So yeah, teenagers and people in their early 20s often using these apps for depression. So yeah, I found that really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Angie, please.
Have you, you know, IU has one of these apps, right? Have you thought about just starting there?
I've talked to Jody a little bit about this. Jody Madeira, I know she's been involved, but I actually don't know much about the app.
If I can guess you're not alone. And, you know, it might be an interesting place to start, right? Because you would have a population that had either been offered the service through an email or whatever, and then a population who had potentially used a particular service. And so you wouldn't have to do necessarily, you know, you might help them out by doing some information gathering for them. But in the process, you could create those scenarios, right? You know, had this stamp of approval type of thing, would you be more, right? So you're in a population then that, you know, has already been marketed to very specifically, quite frankly, by a trusted authority, which is, you know, what I gave the heads up to IU about this. I'm like, you know, you do understand you're like the parents of these kids in this instance, right? So you're given a seal of approval to this, whether or not you think it's right or not. And, you know, so it would at least give you the sort of that pilot preliminary type of conversation that you could test. And they probably would enjoy the, you know, the basics that you would gather, right? How many of you, when receiving this email, you know, signed up for this service? How many of you were recommended? You know, and because it's approved by IU, it obviously has some privacy, in theory, has some privacy protections built in. But the question then could go on of how many of you, you know, was this recommended as part of your therapeutic sessions with the health service, you know, with our therapist, right? That's how I could see this being used, these things being used a lot, right? Is I can only meet, there's only 5 of us and there's 15,000 students. So, you know, I can see you once every other week, but as you become more, you know, clinical in, you know, your moments of anxiety or depression, I'm going to have this app, you know, that can, you know, reinforce some of the learning that I'm doing with you. And so, you know, it might be interesting. What privacy protections do you think exist? Do you even know IU has a review panel that probably went over this, and data stewards that have, in theory, should have approved these things? You know, it's sort of a self-made checklist that they might not mind you doing. You know, and then you can decide if you generalize it. I mean, obviously that's an incredibly biased and incredibly skewed population, but it gives you the beginning of the conversation. So you don't have to figure out Facebook. Doing this stuff on Facebook and stuff terrifies me. All those type of situations. There's no part of me that believes, you know, Facebook actually isn't gathering how many people click on these links and stuff. And, you know, that I just don't believe them. Sorry. So, you know, I would probably go to my grave never advertising anything like this on Facebook. I don't want to know what they're going to do with my mental health information that can be derived from simply clicking on something. They're just a terrifying group of bastards as far as I'm concerned. And that's on the record, on recording, and leave it in there. Nobody's surprised.
On the subject of lack of trust in institutions.
You know, I mean, I guess you could advertise on Facebook and go, okay, you're one of the people that really doesn't have any threshold for trust in institutions. If you clicked on a link for research about mental health on Facebook, you are literally the red flag we were looking for. I mean, I guess you could, you know, use that, you know, you are literally the person. And by the way, here's a video that educates you on how Facebook works. You know, but I guess you're going to do it that way, maybe. But yeah, I think IU might really enjoy this work and kind of self-made population here.
I know plenty of people who know better, but still click on all those clickbait quizzes and stuff on Facebook. Yeah, it's addictive somehow. And well,
that's sort of why it worries me that you get that trust built in there. And it, you know, if it sort of worries me that you're sort of tricking people. If it is true, and it turns out a year from now, it turns out Facebook isn't living up to their promises of you know, being willing to publish research and not gathering data, you know, which nobody believes, you're sort of complicit in that, right? You know well enough how Facebook operates. And so that's why I'm saying I would never do it on there. Because I think you're complicit then when it comes out a year from now that, oh, they were gathering that information. No kidding. you need to know better.
I also just worry about I just worry about crazy people on the internet who I use that term and I realize it's inappropriate context, but people who are just going to use the survey to express their anger against one thing or another.
I do that. I get a link that I'm like, this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
Off I go. You bet. And I'm not mean or hostile or anything, but you bet. What a write in the comment section. What do you think? And posting this type of thing on Facebook, you bet.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at Dan's comment that maybe focusing on the apps that are prescription only apps and looking at the doctors as the people to survey. That's a way to narrow this and to really focus the pool of people who are the prescribing doctors. Maybe that's the group to survey first.
I will say the APA has written a ton of this. When COVID happened, they've written a ton on this stuff. So double check you're not duplicating. It's just not worth your effort to duplicate something. This was a massive issue for therapists. Massive, including, even our local, including DHS and DC, FS all over the country. So I find it hard to believe someone hasn't done a survey and some really specific, please understand your license is in jeopardy if you recommend one of these things and you haven't double checked some of the privacy settings and things.
It's interesting the way that the state licensing laws might or might not, penalize a healthcare provider for recommending a commercial product. I don't know.
Well, I know a lot of the doctors when it first came out, so I don't know how many of you went through this, but you could either do Teams, Zoom, and then a lot of places went, what were we thinking? Wait, Zoom isn't encrypted? We're like, yeah, dumbasses. And they've been having medical appointments, and then it shut that down for a while. And now a lot of the medical providers, who prescribe stuff in terms of, just your ointments and, sort of, I don't need to see you, but that looks like a rash type stuff. So you have to have video cameras on and different things. They took a completely different view of it as well, about 3 months after the pandemic when they switched to all this stuff. And a lot of them have internal links and stuff now. IU Health has one, for example. And originally they were using, believe it or not, I think it was Skype. I can't remember. It was just like, oh my God, my husband, do not click on that link. Who wants to beat you that way with a doctor? I'm like, what the hell? No.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And they now have their links.
Oh yeah, no, that is really good stuff, Angie. And I thought of you immediately at this intersection because you're so on point here. But Inza has had her hand up for a little while, so I want to make sure you have a chance to interject before we have to conclude here too.
Yeah, I just thought, you could also go for Qualtrics. Are you aware of that? It's a software which you can buy, and they also offer you to choose your population according to social criteria. So I think it's currently the best out on the market, and they really do very careful testing with you and then with the pilot search. And so the more money you invest, the more particular they make up your population according to whom you want to ask. And they do send out the survey for you and make sure you get a certain number of filled-in questionnaires. So that seems to be a much better way as running it through Facebook.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. I need to learn more about how Qualtrics does that. We designed the survey using Qualtrics so that people would use the service to take the survey, but I didn't look at using Qualtrics as a recruitment tool. And
yeah, we have done that in a couple of cases, and it turns out to be very good.
Wow, thank you. I'm going to take a look at that. I know nothing about it, so thanks, Inza.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Inza. Yeah. And Mike, we did do a survey with YouGov not too long ago. It was around some cyber hygiene stuff, but that might be a possibility, just a partner, right, with another organization, maybe even the APA, Angie, I don't know, on this type of thing. And Jamie, I think that's a good point as well in terms of the awareness of the cybersecurity and data breaches for some of these health apps. And my quick comment, Michael, we could talk more about this because folks need to run, but I know you know Mike McGinnis well, and he's doing so much kind of interesting work right now in his retirement years around the healthcare system, trust in institutions, kind of polycentricity in the healthcare system. So if you're looking for kind of a theoretical lens around trust and healthcare, he could maybe provide some useful resources and sites at the kind of front end of the paper there. And my mind immediately goes to another follow-up project, just a comparative piece, right? Because I mean, the pandemic's global, you know, these apps are available global. I mean, both globally. So for both, you know, sentiment surveys, trust in institutions, which is a lot higher in other democracies compared to ours, there could be a lot of interesting work there. I feel like you could do that could even dovetail with varying IP regimes. My goodness. So anyway, there's your next book as well. But maybe perhaps for now, if you have any wrap-up thoughts, Mike, please feel free and we'll properly thank you.
Yeah, I just could wrap up by saying thank you so much for all these suggestions. I feel like you all have suggested things that will make this paper better, and nearly all things that I hadn't thought of or hadn't thought more carefully about. So I'm just really grateful to you for taking the time to help me. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. No, it's our pleasure. Thank you again, Mike. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And for anybody who's able to stay on maybe just for a minute or two, Mike, if you have to run, no worries. We can briefly continue the conversation. If not, no problem.
I'll hang out. I can hang out.
Yeah, for a few minutes anyway. And just as a reminder too, this Wednesday, we do have a special research series on data and digital working groups overview with Angie. So I'm not sure if you wanted to mention anything about that, Angie.
Sure.
Oh,
So we're going to talk about the work we've been doing with Greg Bloom, Mozilla. There's a group of us that have been working on data governance in terms of creating a framework series of questions about how to consider creating data governance structures in a data hub, data, you know, whatever relationship you define. And that's going to be the crux of it. It's going to lay out the sort of the visualizations that have been created. And then there's a series of sort of framing questions that we're recommending for institutions to use when they're making these decisions. They are not complete, but you'll see a bunch of push outs about them. Mozilla, Medium, I think the conversations all picked it up pretty quickly. And so we want to get you the information before it gets too big and gets out of our hands, quite honestly, because I think it's going to take off. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to feedback and stuff. So thank you.
Excellent. That's going to be wonderful. Thanks a lot, Angie. So yeah, so hang out if you have a few minutes now. We'll continue with Mike and then look forward to Wednesday at noon.